So what I want to do, I'm going to start with sharing a screen as usual. For those of you who've joined this before, I have a short presentation today. Today is talking about what to do if I'm a little intimidated by my supervisors, and I'll unpack that. This is also, I think, technically our second last scheduled planning. So at some point we'll probably reach out to you and see what other sessions you feel that we should have. Or if we should repeat a session or anything like that. I'm always happy to. I love doing these sessions, and I hope that one day soon we can do them face to face, as long as the world just stays a little bit, the world stops getting a little bit crazy. So as always, I want to begin by acknowledging the fact that this university is on an amazing country full of a really deep and long history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. This was what Australia looked like before colonisation happened. All these different language groups and cultural groups, and I think it's a history we should be really proud of. And I'm really proud to work for a university that acknowledges that history and is working with the local elders to continue to enhance the journey that we're all on. So look, I will say again, just remind everybody again for the first time that if you're joining us, these are meetings about giving you, talking about the culture of supervision and the culture of research. You know, rarely are supervisors taught to be supervisors. We are learned from the supervisors. We learn from our supervisors, and sometimes we learn good things and sometimes we learn bad things. And we tend to mimic or imitate what we've been through. And sometimes, as I've said, that can be good and sometimes that can be bad. So it's important that we, use these opportunities to talk to you about the culture of supervision and what you can expect and what is expected of you, which is really, really important. Okay, so the rules are, as usual, you can jump in and out, attend as you prefer. I'll do a short presentation, I say about 15 minutes. I tend to talk for about 20, 25 minutes. I'm happy to take into Q&A. I will respond honestly and respectfully, and I expect everybody else to follow the same rules. These are recorded, and hence we don't call your name out when it comes to asking questions. But if you need to reach out after the event, some people have, and if I can help you and assist you and provide advice, I'm always happy to do that. So before I continue, I just want to take a moment to let everybody know about a really fantastic HDR event that's happening. This is from the School of Humanities and Communication Arts. It will be on the 12th and the 12th and 13th of November. Hopefully it'll all be face-to-face. And I encourage you all as PhD students or as research students to either present or attend. Sometimes you'll see a conference or something that might not be directly significant to you, but you can still attend and learn from others. Or I encourage you, if you are thinking about presenting and you're from a humanities or a sociology, or even if you're on the threshold of that, science and humanities, this is an incredibly supportive environment. And I know everyone that's presented there has always talked about how much of a positive experience it was. So I got the links there, and yeah, I do encourage you all to think about presenting either or engaging with this event or engaging with future events. So let's get into it. Okay, so today I want to talk about being intimidated by your supervisor. It happens all the time. It happens when you're on your HDR journey. It happens when you are in normal life undertaking a normal journey as if you're working. It doesn't have to be as part of the HDR journey. And so these things happen, and you need to recognize them that they happen. And then you need to actually come up with strategies why they happen, and respond. And so I'm going to talk about why it happens, some of the general strategies, and some of the more specific strategies. Okay. So the first reason people tend to get intimidated is because they have a superstar supervisor. Now, this is someone who might be, you've probably wanted them to supervise you. You probably read their work and you thought they were amazing. And everybody thinks, oh my God, that person is your supervisor. They're amazing, and they're raving about that person. And sometimes when you have that, you often Often when you have that, you think, oh, well, I have nothing to add to the conversations, and you just expect them to provide you with all the information, and you feel you're unworthy. And that is a real problem that that I'll talk about. One of the things I really need to emphasize here, and it's one of the things I emphasize with my students, is that at some point you will know more about your topic than your supervisor. At some point you will overtake your supervisor in knowledge. And so I see this, and so the staff supervisor is just like any other supervisor. They're human, they make errors, they have limitations. So try not to be intimidated by that. But again, I'll talk about some strategies there. The second thing is often people find that their supervisor are asking too much. So you get intimidated because you can't keep up with their expectations. So they might say, okay, so we'll meet in a fortnight, and within that fortnight, I'd like you to have written your methodology, plus have read, these 8 articles and these 3 books, and apply for this conference. And you're like, oh, how do I do that, right? So that can be quite intimidating, because you don't want to say, oh no, I can't keep up. You don't want to sound like you're not committed to the journey. The third one is that the supervisor always seems busy, or they're not responding. They never respond to you. So you see your supervisor, and you see them say, hey, hey James, can I just catch you? Oh no, I'm too busy at the moment. Oh, okay, I'm running off to do something, right? Or I send you or you send me an email, and you don't hear from me, and then you're like, oh my God, what do I do? Do I send another one? Is that hassling? I see James over there having a coffee. Should I go and say hi? Should I not say hi? What do I do? They seem always so busy, and that can be off-putting, because then you become almost like you feel that you're at the whim, or at the at the behest of their time and their timing. The fourth reason is sometimes supervisors can be really mean. They can say things like can write feedback on your work, such as put a line through something and say not PhD level, or must do better, or say something like my supervisor said to me. Things that my supervisor said to me, things like, I don't feel you're committed. You're not committed. I see more commitment from watching my son play football, and he's only 6, so there's really kind of can be horrible things. Your writing's not up to scratch. You write terribly, and they can be quite mean, and therefore you can feel despondent. And if people are mean or say things that are not nice, then you don't want to be there. You get intimidated. You don't want to go along. And finally, you get intimidated because they never take your thoughts into account. So they have an opinion, and you say, yeah, but what about this? And they're like, and they just ignore what you're saying, and so therefore you don't know how much you should assert. You should assert your position, and so you tend to just go, oh, okay, I just won't say anything because they ignore me anyway, and so you become intimidated by that process. So there are 5 reasons you can become intimidated by your supervisor. There are many others, but these are the 5 key ones that are often documented. And they tend to align with supervisor types, supervisors who tend to be, sort of aggressive or micromanagers, supervisors who tend to be, I suppose, not supportive, supervisors who tend to be very busy and don't give you enough time. So there's an alignment between how we feel intimidated by this, and we feel that we can't engage with our research because of that. So let's talk about things you should do. And I want to break this into 2 types of things, and that is just to talk about supervision generally, but then also talk about some of the tactics to follow if you're confronting some of these challenges. Alex, is that cool? Is that working? Thumbs up? Okay. Now, 5 things to keep in mind. But the first thing is to remind everybody about what I said a fortnight ago. And that is that we always imagine our PhD journey to look like this, right? But in reality, this is what our PhD journey looks like, and, you have times when you're so excited, right? You're here, and you're like, oh my God, this is the best thing. I love my research. And there are times here where you're thinking, like I used to think I can go back making coffees as a barista, and, and a lot of the time is spent in between, right? Now, what I want you to think about is that your supervisor journey is much like that. Okay, so there'll be times, like any other working relationship, There'll be times when your relationship with your supervisor will be really positive, and there'll be times where you can feel strained. Okay, so be very careful, especially when you're under stress, like you're feeling pressure, as we do, is if you're then having a negative, a sort of a strained relationship with your supervisor, to read too much into it. Okay, and this can happen. This can happen where you might have applied for a grant, or you might have applied to get something published, and they've been rejected. Then you have a meeting with your supervisor, and then your supervisor cancels on you, or they'll turn around and say something mean, like I'll say something like you might feel a bit disparaging, and that is a problem, no doubt about it. Like, I'm not dismissing that as a problem, but be careful you assess it as part of your journey. Okay, don't just assess it in isolation. So there will be times when you feel that you'll need more support and you feel like you're not getting that support. There'll be other times when you feel you are really supported, and this is just part of the supervision journey. And I say this is because one of the things, the mistake that we often make, is that we often think of research as a lonesome journey, as a journey about me. But research is a journey that's based on building networks. And I will keep on coming back to this idea of networks. It is fundamental that whatever you end up doing, whatever type of research you're doing, you do not see yourself as a lone, isolated researcher. That is the most vulnerable position you can be. Always look for research journeys, always look for support networks. And this is one of them. This is one of the ones that you have, but you have others. If you're in a lab, people in the lab with you, other PhD students who aren't in the lab with you, other academics who aren't your supervisors, people outside, or networks like Alexi runs the early and mid-career network, researcher network. They're really important networks to rely on. Okay, so don't ever just rely on that one relationship with your supervisor. That makes you very, very vulnerable. So what are the strategies that I want to talk about? Well, the 5 I want to talk about is general, and I keep on coming back to this over and over again. That preparation for the time that you spend and engage with your supervisor is key. It's the most fundamental thing in the world. And so and I always talk about it. And for those of you who haven't listened, I think to my first, I think it was the first presentation we did, where we talked about managing your supervisor. It's so important that you prepare leading up, you are prepared during the meeting, and you prepare following. And that includes taking notes, writing to-do lists, sending the material in advance so your supervisor can have a chance to read things. If I have a meeting with you and I'm your supervisor and you turn up and I say, hey, so do you have an agenda? And you say, no, I don't have an agenda. And I say, okay, so what do you want to talk about? You say to me, oh, I haven't really got anything to talk about. What do you want to talk about? I'm going to be like, okay, well, I'll talk about my weekend, but that's not going to help you on your research journey. Okay. So preparation is always the key. And again, I encourage you to look back on some of the work that I presented earlier time. The second thing to say is, remember, this is always your thesis. You need to take ownership of your thesis. And again, this sounds, especially when you're early on in your research journey, it feels it feels intimidating or difficult to say that. But there will be a time where you know more about a subject than your supervisor. You would have read more. So for example, I'm supervising someone at the moment, and already I can see that her knowledge is overtaking mine, and she's just finished her first year. She's read things that I wanted to read but haven't got around to reading. She is, accessing information that I haven't accessed. And so this begins to happen. And so when you start having that confidence and your supervisor says, oh, well, actually, I think you should do this, then, don't be scared to say, well, actually, I really think this is a path I want to go down. This is what we, debate it, discuss it. It doesn't have to be a confrontation, but have this ownership mentality. It's very, very important that you have an ownership mentality. The third thing is to never take things personally. When I get negative feedback, when anyone gets negative feedback, I know when I get it, you take it personally, it hurts. And so when my supervisor would say things to me like, oh, your writing is like a first year quality, of course I'm going to take that personally. That's going to hurt. That's a horrible thing to say. And I would never say that as a supervisor. But you know, what I will say is that he was frustrated because of my lack of progress in a certain area, and he just took it out in that way. So I'm not saying that that was okay, but I'm just saying it wasn't a personal attack. It was just a sense of, you know, your supervisors are there to encourage you, to push you, and sometimes to even give you some hard realities. And that's not about you, that's about the work you're undertaking. So you need to respond, not personally like, oh, he doesn't like me, or she doesn't like me, she thinks I'm horrible, or she doesn't care for me. It's about you thinking to yourself, my work at this point is obviously not meeting expectations. Is that a fair assessment or not a fair assessment? That's what you should be thinking about. This is about your work. And if someone is criticizing your work, then you need to take a moment and think, is this a fair assessment? Have I honestly presented something that's really high quality, or am I trying to sneak something past them, right? And that's something that everybody occasionally tries to do because we get overwhelmed and we take shortcuts. The fourth thing to say, and I've said it before, again, over and over again, is to build support networks. You know, you never, ever should see the PhD or the research journey as something that is a lone researcher. It's all about support journeys. And I will tell you now that anything you go through, someone that's another research student will also go through. The sense of self-doubt, the sense of being disappointed, the sense of having your meetings cancelled, all these things happen to you. You know, rejected applications to submit a paper or whatever it is. These things happen, and you should be able to work with your support structures or your support networks and share the good stuff and the bad stuff and seek advice and support. And that's really, really important. Never feel that you're alone. That is the worst feeling in the world. Never feel that you're alone. You have many support networks, and you should continue to build them and develop them. And then the last one is the last point to make. I think it's the last one. Yeah, the last one to make is to say something, to just sort of say, you know, we often feel that if we want to assert our authority or we want to give feedback to someone, that it has to be confrontational. Yeah, it doesn't have to be confrontational. If you feel that your supervisor is you know, I'll give you an example, and this is a true example. I had, at one point it was a really weird time. I had 4 PhD students all about to submit at the same time, right? True story. And it just was timing. One was part-time and was submitting at a certain time. The other 3 were full-time, but one had taken some time off, and so therefore was catching up. You know, then was submitting with the other one that was working full time, and then there was another one who had been a bit slower. So they were all converging. So every Monday I would turn on my email, and there'd be 4 chapters, right? There'd be 4 chapters for me to review, 4 from different students, right? From different candidates. And so what I would do is I would always prioritize the ones I knew needed the most work, right? And the ones that I knew were really on track and were submitting, you know, were ready to go, I would sort of leave that last. And then sometimes, I will say the truth, is that sometimes this one candidate, I kept on ignoring her work, right? And I didn't mean to ignore it. It was just that I had all this other work, and I kept on thinking to myself, oh, I'll get to that later, I'll get to that later. And occasionally I wouldn't get to it. So one day one day she made an appointment to come and see me, and I sat down, and she's like, hey, James, you know, I want to talk to you. And I'm like, oh yeah, you're doing really well, you're progressing and that. And she said, look, I'm actually feeling like a little bit let down by you. Like, I've been speaking to, you know, to Brendan, I've been speaking to so-and-so, I've been speaking to so-and-so, and they're saying that you're providing them regular feedback, but I haven't received detailed feedback from you for about a month. But I've sent you 4 chapters, and I personally feel really vulnerable and let down, and I want to know if there's a problem. And for me, it was a really important moment, because I realized that in my head, I knew she was doing well, but I hadn't communicated that with her. And so that conversation to me was a way to draw me back and remind me of my obligation as a supervisor, and not just sit there and go, oh, well, she's doing well, I can ignore her, which what I realized I was doing. It was not confrontational. It was just a really positive conversation, and it altered, it reminded me that I needed to actually help. I needed to prioritize in different ways. And so therefore I became better at managing the 4 candidates I had as they were coming into submission time. Does that make sense? Alexi? Yep. Okay. You're the only person I can see on screen, so I'm going with you. Okay. So, okay. So now I talked about the other things that can happen with supervisors. And this is a little bit repetitive, this may be a little repetitive, but I want to emphasize it on certain things. When you get, the most time we get intimidated by supervisors, right, is in the feedback that we receive. And often we will receive contradictory feedback. Sometimes we feel that we're receiving contradictory feedback. And so when we receive that, one of the things that happens is we do not feel confident enough to say, hey, yeah, but hey, Alexi, last week you told me to do this, and now this week you're doing this, right? And that happens sometimes. That does happen. And so what you need to do is, if you've kept accurate notes and a plan, then you always have something to refer to. So it's not a personal thing. So you don't go, hey, Alexi, but you told me to do this. It's more like, hey, Alexi, can we just go through what we spoke about last week? Because last week you were saying you wanted me to focus on this, and this was a case study. Now this week you're telling me to move away from that and do that. Can we talk about why you're thinking about that? And make it about the work. Never make it about the supervisor or yourself. Always focus on the project and the work, right? And then about having a plan is that because you always have an agreed plan. So when I said you have a supervisor who asks for too much, right? If you have an agreed plan, then you can refer to the plan and say, hey, I know you want me to finish, want me to finish this by the end of the week, but we had agreed that this wasn't due until the end of August. So I'm still working towards that. I will try and get it to you sooner, but that was the agreed plan. Is there a reason why I need to bring it forward? So have things to refer to, and that is part of the way you manage not taking it personally, but making it about the work. I hope that makes sense. Does it make sense? Cool. The second thing is to be really clear that you can that you're making progress, and also that, and this confirms that you can work independently. One of the big challenges that can happen, sometimes there's two extremes, right? With supervisors, sometimes there's those who micromanage you and ask you for something every day and want to keep on top of you when you feel like you're an undergraduate student. And the other time is when they totally ignore you. Yeah. And so this is more for managing those who are totally trying to micromanage you and treat you like a PhD student. Sorry, treat you like an undergraduate student. Record your progress, record what you're doing, keep detailed, keep that progress, and share the progress, share that what you've made. Send a note saying, hey, this is what we agreed upon, this is what I've achieved, right? Again, this is all part of preparation, okay? Confirm your independence and that you're making that progress. I think it's really important, and it'll help you deal with those who you feel don't give you enough space to develop your work, and that can happen. The third thing is remind your supervisor to be positive, right? And this is, this again go back to not taking it personally. So if someone says to you, your writing is, yeah, look, you still got a long way to go with that. You say, okay, I get that. I see that I need to improve my writing, but what are some of the positives in my writing? Have I started to develop it in a certain way, right? Have I made progress in this? And so think about, remind the supervisor about the positives, right? Because again, the mentality of a supervisor is often one that says, I need to remind you of what you're not doing, right? Because you're doing that, that's good. I'm glad you're doing that, but I'm not going to tell you you're doing that well. I'm just going to remind you about what you're not doing, right? So someone can turn around and say, oh, you're not producing work fast enough. And you say, okay, yeah, I know I'm not producing work fast enough, but is the quality of my work, are you happy with the quality of my work? Are you happy with this aspect of my work? Or do you think, sometimes when you don't get positive feedback, it's not because people don't think you're doing well. It's often because people just don't think they need to tell you. And again, if I go back to that story about that student of mine, that candidate of mine who was doing really well, I never gave her positive feedback because I just assumed that she knew that if I wasn't saying anything, that I was happy with her progress. Yeah. And that was like I said, that was pretty early on in my supervision career, and I realized that was a mistake. So do say things like, okay, I hear what I hear. Oops, that's a spelling mistake. I'll fix it up later. Okay, I hear there are problems, but what positives can I take? So seek out, remind people to be positive. I think that's really important. And most people say, oh yeah, well no, you have made progress. You have done this, you have done that. You've got a long way to go, but yeah, you are making progress. So draw that out. Be very specific in your questions to draw that out. Okay, this goes back to the other thing I said about understanding at what point with your supervisor are you going through. If you're feeling that your supervisor is not being supportive, the first reaction we often have is to change supervisors, right? And changing supervisors, we've talked about changing supervisors in these discussions before. That can be a valid strategy, right? But it shouldn't be just a reaction because you're going through a bit of a tough period, right? Now, if your supervisor has consistently not supported you and you feel that you haven't got the support you need, then for every reason you should think about changing your principal supervisor or getting a new panel. But if it's just because your supervisor, you're going through a bit of a patch where you feel that you're experiencing tensions with your supervisor, don't always just jump to that conclusion, okay? I know that when I was being supervised, at least once a week, I'd think about changing supervisors. But, that was just because I was frustrated with some aspects of my supervision. And in the end, when I look back in hindsight, I look at that strategy and I think, okay, that wasn't the best strategy that he employed, but that was his strategy. That was his way of managing me. So assess your relationship, be reflective on your relationship. If you're intimidated and the relationship is not working on an ongoing basis, then talk about alternative supervisors, talk about other people, talk to other people that could potentially. But if you're just going through a bit of a down period, is it just because you're experiencing stress or tension, or is your supervisor experiencing stress or tension? So again, think about it as a journey, and think about it if you're at a stage in that journey where you shouldn't take it. You shouldn't. I don't want to say overreact. That's not quite the right word. I don't mean overreact. I just mean more like you shouldn't overcorrect the journey. And then finally, always draw on your panel. I've talked about managing your panel before. Your panel should be a really, really great resource. And if you're feeling that, if you're feeling like in the example where your supervisor is not responding as fast as you want, and they're not giving you the guidance you want, then I talked about in previous times, I talked about how you should draw on your panel. You should draw your panel in. You should copy them in on conversations, ask to see them one-on-one, have conversations with them and so on. Your panel is there to support you. But it's not just your panel. Again, I'll go back to the networks of support. They are so valuable. Having networks of support are really, really valuable, and you should draw on them. So that's it. That's what I want to say. I'm happy to take any questions, but I think first we're going to do a short survey, and then we can break into the Q&A. Is that cool?
Oh, that's perfect. So thank you so much, James. So I launched the poll, so if people can please tick anything that applies to you. It's anonymous, so we're not going to know who did it, and you can choose more than one. In the meantime, when you say your journey is hitting a rough patch, I think it was the second to last point about the relationship. Do you mean that me as a person, as a researcher, hitting a rough patch, my project is hitting a rough patch, or the actual interpersonal relationship between the two people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it can be all of those, the interpersonal relationship. If you sit there and think about the average PhD is 3.5 years, or 3 years and 4 months, or 3 years and 6 months, that's a long time that people are working together. And you go through patches, people feel let down, people feel frustrated, people, meet on bad days. I can think of the many students I've supervised, the many candidates I've supervised, and I look at different points in our relationship where there has been under stress, and that's because they've been stressed, or I've been stressed, or we've both been stressed at the same time. I'm in the middle of marking 150 undergraduate papers, and someone's not doing what I'm asking them to do, and so I react negatively. So yes, that can definitely happen. Sometimes yes, you go through these periods. I'm thinking mostly of interpersonal relationships, but again, it is any interpersonal relationship goes through ups and downs, and you should always be careful about taking it too personally.
Yeah, there's a lot of baggage that comes in with an interpersonal relationship. There's things happening in everyone's life that the other person is not aware of. There's history. You may remind them of another person that they had that was similar, whether you were a student or your supervisor. Yeah. So they could have had a supervisor that was, I had a case where one of my students, basically his brother came to my office and said, how's my brother doing, blah, blah, blah. Oh, by the way, I expect you to be his guardian. Because the brother's PhD supervisor was one of those classic old male paternalistic dudes that basically would invite his students in his house. His wife would cook, and they would do it once a month. And he expected that I, a younger supervisor who does not want to have a personal relationship with every student, would provide that. That was the expectation.
Yeah.
So the interpersonal relationship is very difficult to unpack.
Yeah, and look, and there's been situations where people have taken advantage of interpersonal relationships. There was a story of a supervisor that used to ask her students to babysit for her, and things like that. And that stuff is not appropriate. It's not appropriate. It's and look, and supervision does turn into friendship. And I had two supervisors. One of them, I sort of rarely see. He's actually left academia now, but we keep in contact every now and again. We'll sort of send each other an email. The other supervisors also essentially retired from academia, but stays researching as an adjunct at University of New South Wales. And we become very close friends. During that period, we got to know each other, and then he invited me to his birthday, and then after the PhD journey ended, he was one of the people invited to my wedding, and so so he does, not every supervision is going to end up in a friendship, but neither does it. But you also need to. I noticed that some people here, two respondents have said that they see their supervisor as a friend, and there's no reason why friendship can't form, but you got to make sure that friendship doesn't get in the way of the supervision relationship. There's a famous research study that I often quote about medical doctors, and the medical doctors that build friendships with their patients tend to advise or tend to recommend less invasive procedures because they don't want to make their patients uncomfortable, which has resulted into diseases going undiagnosed. So sometimes one of the risks of forming a close relationship with your supervisor, I'm not saying it will happen, but one of the risks is I really like, I'm supervising you, Alexia, and I really like you, so I don't want to tell you that this chapter sucks. So I'm like, I'll let the examiners tell you that it sucks, not me, right? And that's a risk. That's a real risk because I, as a supervisor, I'm also human, and so I don't I don't want to give you, my friend, bad news. I only want to give you good news. So there's always risk with interpersonal relationships. Part of the risk as well, of course, is how experienced your supervisor is, how many people they've supervised. And some supervisors they struggle as well to know where to draw the boundaries. So it's not a one-way thing. That's why we keep on talking about managing your supervisor, and I'm not talking about it because your supervisor. I'm not putting all the onus on the candidate because that's the way it should be, but that's the way that it will often can become.
Absolutely, yeah, I completely agree with that. Let's go to the Q&A. I'll ask the first question. So one question I have for a while now is if my supervisor regularly replies to my emails in time before deadlines. Now, he's actually a casual academic now, so I suppose that he doesn't get paid for supervision. So I'm not sure how much I should pressure them. But he's also the kind of only expert in my field, so I'm hesitant of asking someone else. So there is this link between expertise and supervision here that maybe we can unpack. He's nice and everything on a personal level, but as mentioned, they're not very reliable.
Yeah. Look, I think look, I think if someone is supervising you, then they need to be employed by this university, especially if someone's supervising you from another university, that can happen. Like one of my panels, there's an external supervisor, but they're based in another university. If someone is supervising you, then they should be on some sort of contract. They should be able to draw on them. And I think that's a really important one. If that person is a casual and they're no longer, then that is problematic. And I would definitely I'd firstly talk to them. I would reach out to them and say, hey, look, if I can ask, what is the status with you here? Are you getting paid? What does this mean for your commitments? And that's not a bad thing to ask. Just ask them, what's the status with you at the university? Is there something I can do? And then I would also reach out to your additional panel members and sort of ask them for their advice and seek what they think is appropriate to happen, because they may turn around and say, oh, well, that person's part of a research team and they're here on contract, and so they can supervise you, or oh, well, budgets have been cut and that we can't pay that person at the moment. Then you need to think about you need to talk to them about an alternative strategy. But I think just relying on someone's goodwill is not appropriate. But if that person is your supervisor, then you do need to, you need to kind of identify if what their work timing is. So like, again, right, if you think about that journey that goes all over the place, there are some times where your supervisor is going to be more responsive than other times. And so you also need to be aware of those times. And that's where I think having a really honest conversations and open conversations. So it's a beginning semester. I'm planning, I've got all this work to do. I've got to do all my lectures. I'm not going to be very responsive in the next 3 weeks. Or, it's the end of semester. I'm doing all the marking. I'm doing all this. I'm doing all that. I'm not going to be responsive. So that's where communication, I think, is really important.
But it also makes sense to talk to maybe the associate dean of HDR or the HDR director, because they're ultimately responsible to make sure that supervisors get paid. And if a supervisor is not being paid, they need to find someone else to at least do some of the tasks. Maybe they're not a fantastic expert in exactly your thing, but they maybe can help with everything else.
Yeah. And there are situations where people have left and they've gone to an alternative employment. They've gone back into private industry and they've agreed to stay on as supervisors, not as primary supervisors, but as secondary supervisors, to help you on that specific part of your research.
Okay, so I have this question that my supervisor is always very busy, and he just skimmed through my drafts and then give just general comments. How should I ask for the supervisor to provide me with more like specific comments for my writing?
Yeah, look, that's a very frequent problem with supervisors, especially if they're in the middle of an ARC or trying to do something, and it doesn't forgive that, but it is a very common problem. The first thing I would do is definitely speak to your supervisor about requiring some more specific feedback, and that's the first one. The other thing is to think about what type of specific feedback you're seeking. Like, is it, like if your supervisor says, oh yeah, look, I know I'm kind of really busy, it's going to be a very busy semester. Well, you obviously can't wait a whole semester to get feedback. But one of the things you might say is, look, I really need you to look at this section of the literature review. I need really detailed feedback on this section. I've highlighted the sections I'd really like you to get feedback on, to give me some detailed feedback on. Again, see what your associate or secondary supervisors can provide. But if you feel that someone is not giving you the specific feedback, you should raise that. But then also say, look, ask them, will it help me to show you which parts I really need feedback on? I'll highlight them. I'll show you. So, and then ask things like, would you prefer me to send you a large document once a month, or would you like shorter documents every week? What works for you, right? And get to that agreement, because again, it's again, I think about the way that I work. I find it hard if someone just sends me like a 2-page thing and says, oh, can you just read that quickly for me and let me know what you think. I would rather have a whole chapter with sections highlighted that people need feedback on. So it's a matter of trying to find out how your supervisor prefers to work. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. So the next one I want to ask is how to build support network, because when I started, it's already a lockdown.
Yeah. Okay. So look, the first thing to say is reach out to Susan Mowbray. Dr. Susan Mowbray, she works for the Graduate Research School. She does a lot of writing support, but she also does online writing support sections. Yeah, that would be one of the things that'd be really important to sort of be part of. And even if you're very, very early on in your writing journey or your research journey, even if you just go along and use that time to connect with people, even if you're spending the time summarizing your readings, even if you just, oh yeah, I'm just going to spend the next hour working with these people and summarize my readings. So always look for opportunities to connect. There was obviously this session, but there are other sessions that, we talked about, Alexi mentioned before, that the GRS school ran. Speak to your supervisor and say, hey, how many other students are you supervising, or does the school have a network that I can belong to? I know that the wonderful Institute for Culture and Society has wonderful HDR representatives like Ying Hao, wave.
Yeah.
And if you reached out to her and said to her, hey, I'd really, is there something happening where the HDR students are getting together online? I'd love to be part of it. Find out who that person is in your school or institute, reach out to them and join up with them, because they would, I'll guarantee you that if I was, I'll guarantee you that if you were part of the Institute for Cultural Society and you reached out to Howard, she would respond straight away and would love to hear from you, right? And so there are people out there and they're there to help you to build those networks even during this crazy lockdown time.
And one of the things we have now is Western Life. So if you go to Google and just type Western Life, you'll see a whole series of events that it's mainly driven by undergrads. But if you're into athletics or extracurriculum activities or anything else, you'll be able to link up with extracurriculum aspects of the work. Another thing is to check out for research seminars that are maybe run by other departments or other faculties, and just attend them, because now they're all by Zoom, so you don't have to go anywhere. So maybe one thing we take on board to do is maybe find a way to publicize all those events in a central page. But it's a really good idea.
And they're great as well, because there's been times where I've attended those meetings, and I've been on there and they've said something and I said, oh, I really like that person's research. So I've gone onto the chat function and just sent them a private message and said, hey, Alexi, I'm James. I'm researching something similar. I would love to organize a chat sometime. Who's your supervisor? That kind of thing. And you build the networks that way. But I think that's a really valuable point. Thanks for raising that.
Thank you. So what happens if I have a really good relationship with one supervisor and a pretty bad relationship with another supervisor of the same project?
Yeah. Look, I think, look, again, this happens, right? Like we all have different, we're all humans, and human relationships are deeply fraught. There are possibly a number of strategies you could follow. One would definitely be, with the one that you have a very bad relationship with, is to be very, very focused on the type of interactions you have. So ensuring that they're focused on specific dimensions of work. So you would sit there and say, I'm meaner than you, Alexi. You're a nicer person than me. So it'd probably be me that someone would have a bad relationship with. They'd say, dear James, I'm just contacting you regarding this part of my research or this part of my methodology. Copy in the person you have a good relationship with and say, I was just wondering if you could provide me very specific feedback on this kind of thing. So be very specific in what you require from that relationship. Yeah. That's how I would do it. If you feel, and then the other thing is to use your positive relationship as your first port of contact, if that's how you feel as well. Like, so if that was, contact that person first before contacting the other person, that would be the other thing. The other thing we spoke about before is what happens when tensions arise within your panel. And that can happen as well. It happens frequently. Again, we're humans and we're fraught, and we are, whatever it is that we feel. So again, that is not your job to manage that relationship. Your job is to focus on your research. And if that's the case, then then you need to kind of raise it with the person you like and say, hey, look, I'm sensing that this is happening. What can we do? Speak to your HDR director or your associate dean research. Speak to other students, other support networks, and ask them for advice as well, and see if they're experiencing similar things.
So I have a specific example. So one is a supervisor that I had since my undergrad, and they're really happy with me, and they're happy to be my supervisor. But then they added a second supervisor who has only been making negative comments when they do comment, and now they're also overseas. Now, in the actual GRS form, it says their supervision is 50-50, which me as a Lexi now thinks that's probably automatic, and the student feels like it's more like 90-10. And they want to find a way to address this in a really respectful way without causing tension.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, if that was me, what I would do is I would email my supervisor I have a good relationship with and say, hey, look, dear Alexi, I've noticed that James is not very happy with the progress I'm making, giving me lots of very negative feedback. Makes some of these feedback make sense to me, but I'm just wondering if you feel that this feedback is warranted, or is there an issue that I need to address? Seek your positive supervisor's advice. There's also no reason why you can't have a similar conversation with the person providing you negative feedback and saying, Jonathan, I noticed that, the last few weeks, I've got a lot of really negative feedback. According to, from the feedback I'm getting from Alexi's, just seems to be quite positive. So there seems to be some disparities here. Can the three of us organize a Zoom session and see where we see if there's tensions happening, where people go? So, look, I hope this makes sense. Someone once told me that if it's a difference between mismanagement or conspiracy, it's always mismanagement, right? So sometimes in your head you have these conversations like, oh my god, that person hates me, they hate my work, my research sucks, and you get into this like really bizarre negative spiral. But the truth is that person might just be that person's communication method. I have a tendency to write one-word emails. Thanks, good, thanks, yep, no worries, approved. And someone said to me once, you can be really rude on email. And I'm like, I don't mean to be rude on email. I'm just giving you an approval. I'm thanking you. I just need to, I presume you want a quick response. I'm giving you a quick response, And it's like, it just feels like it's really short. And I'm like, ask anyone that works with me. When I write that one word, it's just because I'm thinking, you need to know what's happening. And so I just respond quickly. So sometimes it's just a matter of unpacking, what's going on, or if that's a person's way of communicating, and just tell them, just say, look, you can be respectful. You can say, hey, I'm getting some of your emails. I'm getting insights that you don't approve of this project, or you don't like this project, that you don't think I'm making enough progress. Is this the case, or am I just reading too much in your emails? If that's the case, then can I understand why, or what the specific issue is?
Okay. So I have this question that, I have really bad relationship with my former supervisor, and then I just studied with a new supervisor. What kind of advice can you give me for regaining my confidence in being a researcher?
Yeah, look, I will say that unfortunately this happens. It's happened to me when I was researching, and I had a negative relationship with the person who was the supervisor lead, and I just felt I really lost confidence in it. What I would do is I would work with your new supervisor to come up with a very, very clear strategy for the next 3 months, or next 3 to 6 months, and just aim to get some more momentum back. Yeah. Aim to start thinking to yourself, well, what is it that I want to do, and how is it that I want to do it, and then build slowly from there. I can sit and I can tell you, right? I can sit there and I can look at you and I can say to you, you are a good researcher because you wouldn't be here, right? But those words will ring hollow, right? Because you have to believe it yourself, right? I can tell you a million things positive, but unless you believe it, and the way you need to believe, the way that I always think when I'm struggling with something is I always go back to small, biteable, achievable tasks and build momentum from there. And so that would be my advice to you. Speak with your new supervisor, set up a series of manageable, bite-sized tasks, knock them over, achieve them, and then progress from there. Alexi, would you agree?
Absolutely. Small, achievable, SMART, S-M-A-R-T.
Yeah. And and then when you get your confidence back, go become ambitious again. But there are times, look, everyone's career, I'll tell you this now, right? I'll tell you this now. I have published over 100 things, newspaper articles, 40 or 50 academic articles, 12 books. I have a fortnightly newspaper column. There are some days where I just lack confidence. I just don't have confidence. And everything I write down, I feel sucks, right? And when that happens, I don't sit there and say, oh, by the end of today, I'm going to write an article. I just sit there and say, okay, well, let's go back to what I need to do. The first thing I need to do is get some confidence back. So rather than trying to do something really ambitious, I'm just going to go back and read this article and summarize it and then do a mini literature review on this topic area and then build it from there. So that's what you need to do, right? And we all go through that. That's not just you. We all as researchers will go through bad days and good days. And just when you go through a bad day, go back to basics, concentrate on the most basic things. Reading, reflecting, a bit of writing. Reading, reflecting, a bit of writing.
And also to remember that the supervisor is not the only person that will appreciate your scholarship. So even if your confidence as a researcher is shattered, one way to address that is to reach out and find other people in the world, because you can reach them out by the internet, and just build your own research network. Because remember, when you do get your degree, your supervisor is not going to be part of your life anyway. So you'll have to build up your, may not be part of your research life anyway. So you will need to build up your research network. So reach out and build a research network that you find addresses your research needs and sees you as a good researcher. The world is bigger than just your supervisor. I am going to go through the other questions, but first I'm just going to launch a poll to see, getting our feedback from you guys to see how we're doing. So I'm just going to leave that up there. The next question is that I don't really understand what my supervisor means. It's like we're in completely different planets. Now, I try to ask questions to clarify, but sometimes I get even more confusing questions back.
Whoa. Okay.
Enjoy.
That's a different one. Yeah. That's a different one. Yeah. Look, I mean, this can happen or has happened in my time when I had a supervisor, when I was entering, because, my background was not in philosophy, but I did my PhD in philosophy. And so my supervisor would keep on referring to certain things that I had no idea about. And for those of you who study philosophy will also know that sometimes concepts can be very vague and confusing. And I think sometimes we suffer from what I call smart people syndrome, which is when you're doing a PhD, you don't want to actually admit when you don't understand something. And all I can say, the problem with that is the further you go in your career, the less likely you want to admit that you don't know things. So you sit there and say, someone says something to me, and I always say about when I first became the Dean of Graduate Studies, and the then Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research said to me, James, I want you to go out and get your head around block funding and come back to me with a report about what the university should do. And I wrote it down, and I was like, I had no idea what block funding was, and I didn't know who to ask, because I didn't want to ask the people that worked for me, because they're like, I'm their boss. I can't ask them. I can't ask him. He's just giving me a job. If I ask him, he might sack me. So sometimes these things happen, and sometimes what you need to do is often what I do when I'm confused like that is sometimes I just write down keywords and speak to colleagues. So if they're saying something that's really technical, then is there somebody within the group that has got really deep technical knowledge that you can seek from, that you can seek feedback from, and maybe it's just that connection you don't get. Sometimes then it's worth sending an email to your supervisor and saying, dear Alexi, from our conversation, these are the key points that you told me to follow up on. Please let me know if I've got clear understanding of those topics. So be very clear. Just say, I'm a little uncertain about this area. So I seek just clarity from you. And can you just confirm, I'm sorry to bother you, or whatever it is you want to write, but it is one of those things that you just sit there and say, I'm seeking this type of clarity. So
I think we should have another webinar specifically about that question about how do you get people to be on the same planet when they work together in the same project. I think it's really worth unpacking this over an hour. Because you hit in so many points, not just supervisor, but also, you just said in your job when your DVCR asks you to do something. So it's more beyond research. So I'm very conscious that this topic will have a lot of people attending. Yihua, would you like to take up the last question?
Oops, you're on mute.
Okay. So the last question will be, so my research topic is supposed to be my research journey, right? So how can I professionally communicate with my supervisors if they just constantly want to change my trajectory?
Yeah, look, that's a genuine concern. I think what's really important at this point is that if your supervisor wants you to change or go in a direction you're not happy about, you need to clearly understand why. Yeah. So if someone, like this has happened to me, right, where I've encouraged a student or a candidate to go in a different direction, and they were very resistant. And one of the things that I had to explain to them was, don't forget, a PhD is a PhD because it adds new and original knowledge to a topic area, right? And what that person was proposing to do was not doing that. It was more of a report, right? It was going to be more of a report. There was not new knowledge. And so I encouraged, I had to explain that to them. So if you're, for example, wanting to do a case study on Australia and Japan, and someone's saying to you, I don't want you to do a case study in Australia and Japan, I think you should do a case study in Australia and China, for example. Then you're like, yeah, but I'm not interested in China, right? And they might turn around and say, well, look, this is not adding new. This area has been unpacked and researched. It's not going to add new things. So this is what you need to understand why, right? And again, this comes back to what Alexa said before about being on the same planet, right? It's really important that you understand. And I'm not saying that you should always follow that advice, but I'm also not saying you should always resist, because sometimes that advice is really valuable. And so someone will turn around and say to you, yeah, but I don't feel this, I'll turn around and say, look, I don't want to do this. This is where I want to go. And they will turn around and say, look, I get it. And I've done this. I get that you want to do this. But what you're presenting me is a report. It's not a PhD, right? It's not original. So if you want to turn this into a PhD and you really want to do this area, then you're going to have to think about these following things, right? And I know this happened with one of my candidates that I supervised, and in the end, he produced an outstanding PhD, right? But he produced an outstanding PhD because we met halfway, right? Because I was saying, you've got to go that way. He wanted to go this way. But in the end, we found the space in between, right? That was really important. And so he wanted to do some policy. He wanted to do policy work. I wanted him to do something really creative. He was turning around and saying, well, I don't want to do creative things. I'm not interested in creative. And I'm saying, yeah, but policy work, man, that's not a PhD. That's a policy paper, right? That's a report. That's not going to work for you. And so we wrestled together, and it wasn't a negative thing. It was just one of those things where he had to understand why he couldn't just produce a policy paper, right? And it was hard because that was the area he wanted to enter. So then what we ended up doing was finding that spot, right, where he looked at it he did a combination of critique as well as doing something in assessing that policy portfolio and why it was important to do something about it, as well as putting together a list of recommendations. It became something different, yeah. So so I think it's how we need to it's how you need to think about it. Find out why they're doing that, and then unpack it from there.
Someone is asking if they were concerned about work after their PhD.
Concerned about work after their PhD,
Yeah.
like finding work or not finding work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, so that's definitely a different topic area that we should discuss. You know, it is look. Academia has been changing dramatically for the last 20 years. You know, and I think what's happened with COVID is it's accentuated those changes. I don't think COVID's really added that many new crises to academia. What it's actually done is highlighted the crisis we've been facing around funding, around the way, the changing nature of work, expectations. You know, when I first started my PhD, everyone told me that there'd be so much work around because everyone was going to retire by the time I finished my PhD. And all those people that were meant to retire, they haven't retired yet. They're still there. You know, we need, I think one of the big challenges for the university, for all universities, not our university, but for academia, is a generational change and what it means. And so I would sit there and think about, you know, work is going to be hard to come by. I encourage you to access a presentation by Inga Mewburn. She did a presentation about 3-4 weeks ago on the future of the workforce for PhD students. And in that, she discussed how getting onto a PhD journey or getting onto a journey means that you may have to work outside of academia for a while. You need to be creative in the type of work you're thinking about, and understand how to unpack position descriptions to understand when because someone's not going to say, I'm looking for a PhD. I'm looking for someone who's got a PhD, but they're going to ask for certain skills, and you can unpack them. So yeah, I will say that would be my recommendation. But you know, we should do something. Maybe we can do one of these in the future, maybe with a panel of people, and talking about you know, the future of work for people with high degrees. Yeah, we did a really great one with you on the EMCR, right? So yeah, so we can talk about that.
Yeah, so the industry needs people like you, government and industry, well, people like us.
Not like me, like all of us, yeah.
Yeah, all of us. So the question is, how do we frame the language of what we've done to something they can understand? Because they don't want to think that we're just some egghead in an ivory tower that does stuff. We just need to translate what we do. And I really think we should have a whole hour for that. So I do want to close today's topic and thank everyone for putting their time here. The slides will be shared soon. So will the recording after it's been processed. So later today, you will get from Yingha the presentations, the slides, and the recording. Please let your friends know about this series, and if you have any other feedback or comments, please feel free to email any of us, and we will get it all together and transmit it. If you want to rename anonymous, please feel free to email Yinghua. So as a fellow PhD student, she fully understands the anonymity required. Otherwise, feel free to direct email James if you have any specific questions. So from me, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. And I just see Amanda's got a question. I'll find out, Amanda, where Inga's recording is. I know that my partner, she attended it, and I think she's got the link. So we'll send that out as well. Okay.
All right. Oh yeah, thanks, sorry, everyone. I missed that. It was about Inga. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.